Welcome everybody, this is Tim Watrous, President of Digital Advisors.
And this is Kevin Gordon, President of Capital Advisors Group.
We'd like to welcome you to our K-12 Politics and Tech video series.
Our objective is to give you the absolute latest of what's going on in Sacramento that affects public school districts, obviously, and as well as all the technology stuff that's going on that's so vital to delivering for kids these days.
And remember, if you find these videos useful, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and share out over social media. You're our marketing team. We appreciate your support, and let's go ahead and get started. All right, welcome everybody. Tim Watrous, President of Digital Advisors, back with another episode of K-12 Politics and Tech. As always, co-host of the show, Kevin Gordon, President of Capital Advisors, is here. Kevin, glad to have you.
Great to be here.
Yeah, and one of the founding partners of Capital Advisors, Jack O'Connell, the legend. Let's just give you that term, if that's all right. Jack, wonderful to see you here.
Thank you very much. Always nice to be with you. I've never chopped down the cherry tree, nor have I ever had to row a boat in the Potomac to get to the other side and then swim back.
the stories of history as well. Yeah, we'll listen to more of those. But Jack, I know you just got back from DC, and let's start there. Kevin, the last time we had Bob Wise on, we were talking about sort of the looming legislation that was sort of bogged down. And, it looks like there's been an agreement made. Hopefully we're going to see some action next week. But maybe, Kevin, just fill us in on what you think the most important aspect of this new legislation is for schools. And then, Jack, if you just tell us maybe some observations you had in DC, that'd be great.
Yeah. I mean, so obviously they were hoping to get a deal completely done and passed and signed and on its way before the president took off to Glasgow. But what they ended up doing is queuing this up so that the debate continues in the next week. But the deal essentially has been cut. And the most important thing for us in education, because they did toss out the community college piece, they tossed out a number of different things over the last few months that would have benefited K-12. But the one single biggest thing that's going to help, and it's going to actually help the state of California in a big way, is the universal preschool, and that's the 3 and 4 year olds. It's hundreds of billions of dollars that's going to be invested in this, the biggest single investment in early education in 100 years that the federal government's ever done, combined with the child tax credit that it'll be extended for a year. The president wanted that to go out a lot longer. I think he wanted to go out 4 years, but he had to compromise on that. But all of this stuff will get done next week. But the good news too is that once they get to that final agreement and they get ready to do votes, they're going to vote on the infrastructure package as well. So 1.75 billion on the spending proposal, 1.2 billion on the infrastructure package. And Governor Weiss has talked about, lead pipe and all these other kinds of things that are these extra benefits to us. And, near and dear to your heart, Tim, is the investment, the continued investments in broadband. Those are part of the infrastructure piece. So lots of good stuff happening. And Jack, I'm just curious about what you sensed sort of as the mood of what was going on back in DC.
It's really the only game in town. That's all everybody talked about. The strategy of holding up the $1.2 trillion major measure for infrastructure. And then, of course, a lot of folks are privately very disappointed on the social side. I mean, the initial bill started with $6 trillion, basically negotiated with themselves and brought it down to $3.5 trillion, then basically negotiated with two senators, one from West Virginia, one from Arizona, and now it's hovering around $1.75 trillion. But it looks like it's pretty much in good shape to finally and ultimately pass.
Yeah, I think really one of the things that has been a great frustration back there in DC has been the fact that I think Democrats know that the midterms next year very likely are going to turn sort of the center of power, and that they're really going to eclipse any opportunity to get anything done. And so it behooved them to negotiate and pound out something, and it's a lot smaller than what they would have wanted. At the same time, people that are, pretty far to the left who wanted the whole thing, from the beginning, are upset with these two Democrats who are their moderates, because again, they would have made the argument this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to get this really big package. And if not for them, they would have gotten it, right. They've just these two votes short. So, it's all of that politics going down. At the end of the day, sort of a moderate approach to all of this stuff is probably actually in the interest of Democrats if they have any hope of hanging on in the midterms. But I'm going to be real interested in what Governor Weiss has to say next week once the package is all done. You guys are going to want to join us for that because it'll be a summary of what ultimately did come to pass. And there's a lot of threats still being made by some of the progressives in the House about what they're willing to vote for. So we think they've got the deal that's going to go forward, but we'll be able to confirm that for sure next week.
And the other reason for urgency, Tim, is there are 2 gubernatorial elections next Tuesday, one in Virginia, one in New Jersey. And I was in DC area about a month ago. Just about every single TV commercial was on the gubernatorial race. And I didn't turn the TV on much these last 3 days, but every time I did, boom, there they are again. So, and they believe that it's going to be in the Democrats' best interest to try to, win Virginia Democratic, keep New Jersey Democratic, if they can pass this measure, both these measures, and that's going to be a feather in the cap for the 2 gubernatorial candidates.
That's a good point. Yeah, the political implications for these elections of getting something done is important, and not getting it done probably hurts Democrats at the polls.
And that's before Tuesday.
Yeah. So anyway, lots of stuff going on.
Yeah, we have quite a show stacked up for next week then, as we get to report out on all this. So looking forward to that. And we, as everyone who's watched this frequently knows, Jessica Rosenworsel has been acting FCC chairwoman for quite some time now. She's been officially nominated by Biden. Looks like she'll be the first woman chairperson of the FCC, which is great. She's also been a wonderful proponent for education, closing the digital divide, been responsible for leading things like Emergency Connectivity Fund, which we've covered exhaustively on this show, emergency broadband benefit, and sort of speeding up a slow process, which we know as E-rate, kind of making things move there a little bit faster. So we're excited to see her be in that chairperson role. And Kevin and Jack, I know you were kind enough to make the connection between Rosenworsel and the California education leaders on a recent call. So it's wonderful that she's got some connection here in the state and out there in the U.S., kind of helping really champion education and connectivity for all students in the U.S. So we're looking forward to seeing her leadership and how that impacts the FCC. They also added a new person on the panel, or have nominated a new person on the panel, Gigi Sohn, I believe is how you pronounce her last name. And she's outspoken when it comes to things like net neutrality. And our friends over at Site do a lot of advocacy around this, trying to make sure that the internet is level when it comes to certain types of applications having more bandwidth than others. So excited to see what happens there and get to know that agenda a little bit more. But anyhow, looking forward to seeing what Rosenworsel can do in the active chair role, and we'll keep you updated there as new things arise. So. Kevin, I know the FDA is granting some emergency use authorization. Couldn't say that 10 times fast if you paid me. Could you fill us in there on the latest there, please?
Yeah, so people have seen all the news about the FDA's action with regard to 5 to 11-year-olds now, being able to get the vaccination, and of course we haven't had it till now. And there are going to be concerted efforts both by the federal government. The governor said he's going to go headlong into this, and we're going to do a major campaign to try to get kids in those age ranges vaccinated. And what they'll do is they'll work in communities across the state where there's a willingness where the school folks are totally willing to be partners in terms of the sites where our kids actually are at. And we know that there are pockets of the state where there's still trepidation. What I wanted to do was talk about the relationship of this new authorization to the mandate that the governor had already sort of proclaimed relative to vaccinations for next year. And what I want to remind you is that what the governor said is that he's going to be doing a mandate not for the age ranges where there's emergency use authorization, but only where there is the full use authorization granted by FDA, validated by CDC. We're not expecting that to happen, honestly, until well into next year, which would affect the start of the school year in 22-23. Now, there is some possibility that things could come together quicker, and that permanent use authorization would be in place early enough for it to affect, again, the governor's executive order says the first semester of instruction after full use authorization is done. If they do that full use authorization earlier, then it'll affect those upper ages, not that's 11 through 17 or 11 through 16. 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds are also already part of the full use authorization. But the governor did not want to make schools subject to a mandate until it covered all of 11 years old all the way up to 18. We're not expecting that again until at the very earliest it would affect January, but in all likelihood, it's not going to kick in until next year. These early grades, the 5 through 11, we're absolutely not expecting till well into 2022 if we even get it in that period. That would be a full use authorization. Right now, it's only emergency use. And so we'll see where things go. But I did want to point that out to people, the distinction, so they're not thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to have people in my crowded boardrooms now banging us over the issue of a mandate that would apply to 5-year-olds, because it doesn't. So we're really looking at 11 through 18. That's the one we're going to be facing sometime next year, and in all likelihood, not till the fall. So we wanted to make sure we mentioned that.
Yeah, that's a important clarification, and yeah, less yelling in the board meetings is better from what I understand. So thanks for clearing that up, Kevin.
You bet.
So there is a big news story actually about Biden signing the K-12 cybersecurity bill, which makes a really wonderful headline. I just wanted to call that out, that thank goodness there's some legislation trying to help schools with cybersecurity. I will just say though that there's not a lot of teeth to it when it comes to helping school districts, other than sort of raising some awareness. They're going to do some evaluation of how bad the situation is for K-12, but there's not a lot of remedy in it there for school districts. So, we talk about things that are sort of headlines and not necessarily great helps, but it is a start in the right direction, because as they gather data, they're going to understand how challenging it is for schools to navigate this sort of thing and the kind of help that they're going to need. But what we really want, and if you get a chance, everybody, we talk about advocating for some sort of K-12 cybersecurity specific funding is so utterly important. School districts cannot do this on their own, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but there's an article that we'll include in the email that goes out, and we'll put under the show link, that talks about how enterprise the title is massively subcontracting for cybersecurity work. That means the biggest companies on the planet can't find enough talent. They don't want to hire their own cybersecurity talent. They can't find it, so they're out there subcontracting it. They're buying software to help remedy this stuff, and guess what? They have a budget to do it. So do not, believe that your IT team is solely capable of solving this challenge, because enterprise understands that that's the case. And I think we had that Brian Olson on, Kevin. He was here maybe a few months ago, and he said, it's like speaking another language.
Right.
So if you expect your IT leader to be able to solely handle this, it's just a major expectation for them, and it's not really reasonable. It's not really the way the market is playing things out. So as a leader, have some important conversations with your team around cybersecurity, extra help that you might need to bring in to help you, basically add an ounce of prevention here to something that can have a massive disruption to your network and your learning. So I'll jump off my cybersecurity soapbox.
They say when your team says they need the help, they do. And we're here to validate that. The other thing I was going to mention, Tim, is that for the very first time, I think ever, AXA and CSBA are going to do a joint advocacy trip back to Washington, D.C. next spring. They've never collaborated to do one trip together before, and we're helping to try to queue that up. I'm thinking that this could be one of those topics, and the president does have a White House advisor who works just on this issue. We might have to drag you back for meetings that we'll have on this subject to try to impart to them the importance of the next step beyond signing the legislation as actually resources for schools, so that we can get our arms around these really big, challenging issues regarding cybersecurity. So all that is really helpful.
Yeah, well, thanks for helping broker that, Kevin. That's a powerful duo to bring back to DC and speak on behalf of school boards and school district leaders. So thank you for making that happen. And yeah, would love to join you if I can tag along. Yeah. So with that, speaking of the state, there's been some revenue projections. We talked about it last time. Can you give us the latest there on state revenue picture?
Yeah, happy to, Tim. And when you go back to DC, we're going to sign you up for the 7 a.m. breakfast after landing about midnight. which your friend did here this week when we got there. But good news on the front for state revenue. It kind of reminds me when I was a state superintendent, I really liked calling superintendents and principals, telling them they're a distinguished school. If they got a call from my chief deputy, it was good luck on the audit. It was that kind of thing. So you're allowing me to bring more good news here today. The Legislative Analyst's Office just recently put out a report looking at the projections, and the analyst is estimating we can look for and expect between $8 billion and $30 billion north of what the budget was. It was adopted just as and took effect on July 1st. Between 8 and 30 is kind of a big window. I would say that's like if you and I call and order a pizza at noon and they tell you we'll be there sometime between 1 o'clock and 9 o'clock. Perhaps not the most helpful, but you'd much rather be above than below, and we've been on the other side far too much. The current year projections, as of right this minute, is we're running a little over $9 billion north of where the projections were. There was another projection out just recently that said you can expect this to be about $33 billion above. And keep in mind the way Prop 98 works, we would be entitled to almost 40% of that, on the natural. And then where's this money coming from? Most of it, which is where the state general fund receives most of its money, is from the personal income tax. And we're running there about $6.5 billion above where the projections were. And keep in mind for that personal income tax, almost 70% of that money today in the state general fund comes from the personal income tax. And almost half of that 70% comes from the top 1%. So as long as the stock market continues to do well, the tech industry continues to do well, unemployment has been the same for 3 months in a row. So California is doing very, very well. The sales tax for us is a little over $1 billion above projections for the first quarter of this fiscal year. The bank and corporation taxes are about $1.5 billion above what we thought. So I think it's pretty easy. And I've heard people in the governor's office say we could be in the neighborhood of $40 billion north of what the projections were. So that's the strong economy. I'll just give you one thing to keep an eye on, and that is the GAN limit. The GAN limit was named after Paul Gann, who was part of the Prop 13 back in 1978 with Howard Jarvis. Gann came back a year later and said the state government needs to live within its means. And so you're going to get a population adjustment and inflation adjustment, but you can't spend any more than that as a state. However, there are some major exceptions. So any disasters you have is outside the GAN limit. And I can argue every nickel we spend on COVID should be outside the GAN limit. And then also capital outlay can be outside. I think that's one reason why we have nearly $500 million in this current budget to help us with our pre-K issues as well. So just something to keep an eye on. You're going to hear about the state appropriations limit. They're talking about this GAN limit, something that the folks here at the Capitol will have to continue to work with them and look for ways to make that work.
I mean, one of the things about it that as the legislature was looking at the budget last year, they were the governor's people were projecting that we were going to hit the GAN limit, and half of the money, you spend half of the money on a rebate to taxpayers, the other half goes to schools.
It was $18.1 billion on both, remember, on each one.
Yeah, and we figured that what they did is they papered over it and they said, well, we did make the commitment to give money to taxpayers. We're going to make good on that. And that's where they got the checks that went out, the COVID related checks, but they didn't give the school people our half because again, they redefined their way out of the problem. The question is, if it gets bigger, will it be too big for them to sort of paper over? And if they can't, there's going to be a little windfall there for us in schools too. So we'll look for what's going on with regard to GAN.
And Kevin's absolutely right. For every dollar over this appropriations limit, 50%, 50 cents would go towards this rebate. And that's what the Golden State Stimulus Program was. Basically, as I recall, the threshold was if you make under $75,000 a year, you're going to get a check for $600. And if you had kids, it would go up more. And then the other 50%, as Kevin said, would go to education.
So yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for breaking that down. And I guess it's good news. We just don't know how good the news is. So as we get more, we'll certainly share this with everyone. And I just want to say, Jack, it's an absolute pleasure having you here. Thank you so much for joining us. And Kevin, great to hear from you as always. And we'll look forward to speaking to Bob next week as we hopefully finally see this both these big pieces of legislation passed that we've been talking about for quite some time. So want to thank everybody for tuning in. If you haven't told your friends, please do so. Please subscribe if you haven't yet, and please help blast us out on social media. We love doing this and just trying to bring a little goodness to you folks who are working hard every day supporting our students in the state and around the U.S. So thanks, everybody. Take care, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, everybody.
So thanks again for joining us for another week of this broadcast.
And I just want to take a moment to remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel and share this out over social media. Again, you're our marketing team. I'll also finish by saying, if you have some questions, please send them our way. We'd be happy to address them on a future broadcast. So with that, thanks everybody, and we'll talk soon.